Let's open to Matthew 25, starting in verse 21 this evening. The next time that most of us will get to spend some time with the Lord Jesus Christ is when he's saying these words. We will see him when he comes to take us to be with him. But the next time we actually get a time alone with him, Matthew 25, starting in verse 21, tells us what he's going to be saying. This is in the context of some of our Lord Jesus' final teaching times. He's telling these parables, and in this parable of the talents, he says in verse 21, "And his Lord said to him, 'Well done, good and faithful servant. You are faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord.'" And then verse 23, the same. His Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." You know, there seems from this parable to mean that there are degrees of fruitfulness, degrees of faithfulness, degrees of reward from Christ. And this evening, the concept of that moment when we receive from him for our lives is what I'd like us to look at and to consider. If you want to turn with me to Revelation, that's the context in chapter 5. And I want to briefly sketch where we were with a week intervening. I remember the great class that I had in seminary that said, most people will not remember what you said between Sunday morning and Sunday night, let alone a week removed. And then the teacher said, "All of you tell me what you preached on 2 weeks ago." No one could remember. The pastors. And so I will repeat a little bit only because it's very Petrine. It's very much like Peter. Peter stirred people up by way of repeating. But do you remember what heaven will be like? 2 weeks ago we considered that. Probably you marked maybe something in your Bible. But Revelation 5 and verse 11, it's the angels that first will capture our attention, I believe, because there will be so many of them. It says in verse 11, the voice of many angels. And then if you back up to chapter 4 and look at verse 5, next, the next big sight in my walking through heaven, through the scriptures, will be the crystal sea. It's at the end of verse 5, it talks about this fire burning before the throne. And then verse 6, there was a sea of glass like crystal. There's this pavement that Moses saw. It's this reflective, beautiful floor that's reflective of the light. And it's an ocean of completely clear and reflective glass. And then it says in verse 5, though, that of chapter 4, that all this is going on before the throne. You see how it says that from the throne, verse 5, proceed lightnings, thunderings, voices, and 7 lamps are burning before the throne. Because the next thing that will rivet us is that throne that's emanating lightning, and that, as I shared last time, it says in Daniel 7, the Ancient of Days is seated there. The throne itself is on fire. It's a fiery flame, it says in Daniel 7, 9, and 10. And a fiery river comes forth out of it. You remember that whole river of fire? So we've got all these incredible number of angels, and we've got this throne that's got all these fire and lightning reflected in this floor. And then, if you look at verse 6, it says at the end of verse 6 of chapter 4, in the midst of the throne, around the throne, were 4 living creatures. There's these burning ones, these creatures that are living creatures with eyes all over, and the 4 different faces. But look in verse 8. They do not rest day or night, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come." So the setting of our coming before the throne of the Lord is preceded by this buildup of what it all looks like. Now remember, if people stand at equidistant spaces, we're talking about hundreds, even thousands of square miles it would take to have hundreds of millions of angels, the throne, and then to have upwards of 1 billion believers. Can you imagine standing in that huge arena with billion and hundreds of millions of beings there, and how vast it would be, and how overwhelming it would be with these creatures that are night and day, ceaselessly, never rest, but say, holy, 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 verse 8, Lord God Almighty, who is and was and is to come. And then if you back up to verse 4 of the same chapter, it's the thrones with the 24 elders, and every time those creatures cry out, holy, 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 the elders, the 24 elders, and most likely all of us represented by them, all the believers and all the angels, we cast ourselves down. That's why you need a little bit of room, because people are actually casting themselves down before the throne. So the question that we begin with this evening, Jesus is inviting us to have our life assayed, to have it, as we saw last time, go through the fire, to have it revealed whether or not what we live for mattered to Him. What we live for matters to us, but did it matter to Him? Was it what He commanded us to do? Were we good and faithful servants? And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what do you wish to have in your hands to give to the one who loved you and gave yourself for Him? Or gave Himself for you? What do you want to have in your hands to give to Him? What crowns, and there are 5 specifically described in the Bible. What is it that you are anticipating? I know that our little children, when they're invited to a birthday party, I mean, it's the biggest thing to get that present, and they wrap it, and they just about wear it out, carrying it around, because they're so excited to give it to that friend that they love. And I know that on special events that many times I just would like to give Bonnie her present. I'm so excited to give it to her. I have trouble. In fact, she tells me I always tell her what it is before I give it to her. But, it's just one of my bad habits. But we love to give something to someone we love. And we love to show our love for them by the giving of that gift or that card or those words. Well, what do we measure? How do we know what will count in heaven and what doesn't? Well, in chapter 25, and that's where we're going to begin. If you want to go back to Matthew 25, I want to go through a series of tests of what the building materials. Remember, it says that we can build with gold, silver, and precious stones. We saw that last time in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and the gold and silver and precious stones are what last. But before we actually look into what lasts, I want to give you a sobering warning about heaven, because a pastor friend of mine was preaching, and he wrote a book on his sermons, and it's called Follow Me. And he in that book detailed 3 things that rob us of rewards. And I just want to read those before I talk about the positive things that gain rewards, because there's 3 terrible dangers that can rob anyone of finishing well and earning Christ's well done. And that's what we all want to hear, right? It's not how you start, it's how you end that matters. And we want to finish well, and we don't want to be castaways and disqualified and lose our reward, as Paul said. So these are 3 areas that concern all of us who seek Christ's full reward. And here they are. Number 1, and for most of you this won't be a problem, but for some of us it is, beware of the sins of old age. Now, if you're not yet old, if the Lord tarries, you will be. So even though you might not think this applies to you now, you should think about it, because the sins of old age are crippling. What are the sins of old age? Number 1, a lust for comfort. Older people easily can have a lust for comfort and convenience. There's this idea, I deserve it, and I want to be comfortable, and I worked my whole life. There's nothing wrong, with having a level of life, but there is a lust. You know what lust is? It's insatiable. It just never is quite satisfied. It always has to have more and more. So a lust for comfort and convenience, a greed for recognition. It's interesting. Some older people, they desperately want to be recognized. It's almost like this legacy thing that they talk about with presidents, that they want to be remembered for something. Be careful who you want to remember you. The Lord says, if you get remembered here, and if you consume your life with having people remember you, as Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, you have your reward now. That's why it's hard to put a plaque on everything and honor every gift. And we do that. And I've been in the ministry 31 years, and there are people, they want recognition. But when they want that to the point that they expect it, I tell them, that this is your only reward. Jesus said, if you want the trumpet played for your gift, that's the only reward you're going to get. See, part of the sin of old age, and for not so old people, is a lust for comfort and convenience, a greed for recognition. And here's another one, a covetousness for security. There seems to be a growing insecurity the older you get. And there's this complete fixation on security. The whole, burglar alarms and everything are wonderful and all that. But think about this. The Lord is actually the one that keeps us secure. All of us live with an appearance of security. If you only knew everything that could happen around us at all times. Every time there's a disaster, people couldn't believe that could happen. I remember when the natural gas line somewhere in the country erupted and exploded and started burning, and all the people that were nearby in the apartment building were injured and some killed. And people never thought that there are natural gas lines running all over the place and many other things. We joke about Michigan being at the end of that gasoline delivery pipeline that comes up wherever it comes through. Yeah, and that thing, just like the natural gas thing, could have a disaster that we have never even thought about. But beware of the sins of old age. Secondly, beware of the problem of exceptionism. This pastor said in his messages, and exceptionism means I think my life is an exception to God's Word. And so I can excuse myself from doing anything for heaven because of my past, because, my past just keeps me from serving the Lord, or my pain. Some people constantly say, I can't do anything for the Lord, I have headaches or aches or whatever. Or my poverty, I don't have any money and everybody else has money, they should do it. Or my poor self-image. Whatever it is, if you have the problem of exceptionism, it was interesting. This past week in Scotland, I was talking to a veteran missionary. His father was a great servant of the Lord, and he followed in his footsteps, and both were in the mission field. And you know what he told me? He said the most difficult things he sees are children of pastors and children of missionaries, because they often get in trouble because they think that they're an exception. That because they've served the Lord so hard, they're exempt from perhaps some of the restrictions the Lord puts on the holiness and the discipline of life. In fact, in specific, he was telling me about one pioneer missionary who pioneered the gospel into South America at great expense. He neglected his children, he neglected his wife, neglected family time. They were always poor and suffering. And so the kids, then the dad became famous after he pioneered the work. And so they started being invited places, and they even got first class upgrades, and they started staying in resorts, and people started taking them out to dinner. And this boy grew up with his father's glow, and he thought that he deserved that. And so he became a missionary, and it ended up that he began breaking the rules and taking money that wasn't his, and even was later caught in adultery and totally destroyed his ministry and his life and his marriage. But it was this idea of exceptionism, that all those rules, my life is an exception to God's Word because of my past, or because I suffered so much already, I deserve this. And finally, the last area that can erase Christ's well done, not only the sins of old age and the problem of exceptionism, is if we allow an unmortified pocket of pride. Just like a wound that is not dealt with can get necrotic, the tissue can die, it can get gangrenous, it can begin to poison the body. Did you know that we are to mortify and put to death and deal with and cut off and do whatever it takes? Remember, Jesus said, if you have an eye that offends you, pluck it out. He wasn't talking about self-mutilation. What he's saying is That sin is so bad, we take radical measures to deal with it. And if there are unmortified pockets of pride, if we allow pockets to grow and not be dealt with, we can become proud of our intellect, we can become proud of our achievements, we can be proud of our giftedness, we can even be proud of how good we are. And pockets of pride in our life can erase Christ's well done. God hates pride. It is the supreme sin. It is the beginning of the downward spiral of Lucifer, the greatest created being of all time, and it is also at the heart of all difficulties and destructive things going on in the church and in marriages and family. It's pride. It's like Isaiah said, that we want our own way. And pride, I is in the middle, Pride, and sin, S-I-N, the I, the me. Even Lucifer's name, Lucifer, there's this big I right at the center. And if we have unmortified pockets of pride, it can erase Christ's well done. And to avoid these dangers and help us get ready for Christ's well done, Jesus has given us a series of lessons. He told a lot of stories, and the apostles did too, of exactly what it is that will last forever. And the first one is right here. Look at Matthew 25, where we were, verse 21. Jesus says, well done, when he sees us dream about winning the ultimate prize of all of life. You know what the ultimate prize is? You know what we should dream about? Hearing Christ's well done. My youngest son loves to mow the lawn. And, at first I didn't like him to mow the lawn because, he missed that little strip, You ever teach your kids how to mow? They don't go straight and they miss those. And it looks like it just looks like that. And so my neighbor in Portage, they mow their lawn twice a week. They're serious about their lawn. And so the first day he mowed ours, he missed those little strips, and this older lady came out, and she comes out in her robe and wears this thing on her head. She was looking over the fence. I could tell she was looking at those strips that he missed. But I decided that I was going to encourage him because, you can improve on anything. And so I said, everything you cut so well. And then I walked him through and showed him the little strips. And I said, did you see the lady come out with the head covering and the robe on? I said, she mows her lawn she has someone mow her lawn twice a week. She's very serious about this. I said, it would be helpful if you overlap the mower. And if you go into the part you've already mowed and mow, even if it takes a little longer, because I said, look, it makes these pretty lines. Like her lawn, And so it was so precious. Do you know, he mowed the lawn about 3 days later. And he came to me and he said, could you look out the window and tell me what you think? You see, he labored for what? The well done. And if a child can be motivated to do extra work and to overlap a little bit and to take a little bit longer to do something, can you imagine how motivating it is to hear Christ's well done? And Jesus said, well done, good and faithful servant, verse 21. Jesus told this story because he wanted us to think about that moment. Paul said, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high call, the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. He says, I want my life to be pleasing to him. I want my life to get his well done. I want my life to be acceptable to him. Paul says, an acceptable sacrifice. Do you ever dream about getting the ultimate prize? The ultimate prize is not gold crowns. It's Jesus saying, well done. You are a good and faithful servant. If you back up to chapter 20 of Matthew, he tells another story that's another test, as it were. The first one is Jesus will reward those who seek to win his well done as a good and faithful servant as the ultimate prize. But Jesus also will reward us when we seek to be the greatest servant. Now I hope that you have, in fact, when I go around and meet with all these groups and have dinner at their homes and we're enjoying all that, and when I meet and write in the back of my Bible people's names, I talk to the little people. And I talk to them, I say, and what are you going to be when you grow up? I just love to ask them that. And they go, a fireman, or, professional golfer, or whatever. They think deeply about it. And some of them say, I don't know. And I always pull them aside and I say, you know what? You're going to be asked that a lot. I said, do you know what the best answer to that is? Well, I don't know what I'm going to do. But one thing I'm sure of, I want to serve the Lord. The greatest thing in all of life is being useful to the Lord. Everything else is ancillary. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is less than that. The most important thing, you can be a great musician. You can be a great architect. You can be a great doctor. But the greatest thing is being useful to God. Everything else passes away. The buildings will fall apart. The people that you treat will die. The whatever trade you're in, it will diminish. But usefulness to God. And what he says, look at chapter 20, verse 20. Because this is such a good story. And the mother of Zebedee's sons came to him with her sons, kneeling down, asking something from him. Isn't that typical? Parents trying to promote their kids. Verse 21, he said to her, What do you want? She said to him, grant these two sons of mine might sit on your right hand, the other on the left in your kingdom. She went for the top, didn't she? She just said, I've got the best boys in the world. We all do. Verse 22, but Jesus answered and said, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I'm about to drink, be baptized with the baptism I'm baptized with? And they said to him, we're able. Verse 23. So he said, you will indeed drink my cup and be baptized with the baptism. And then verse 24, the 10 heard it and were greatly displeased. And Jesus called them to himself, and this is the lesson. This is what he said. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. And a lot of people love to say how many people they have working for them. You ever heard that? Well, I have 200 men under me. I have 300 men that work for me. That is a measure of greatness. It's not God's, but it is a measure. Verse 26, yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant. By the way, he never says there's anything wrong with desiring to be great. Just desire to be great in a godly way. Verse 27, and whoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. And here's the essence. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. The greatest thing we can do is seeking to be the greatest servant of the Lord. Remember, a servant is one who does the will of another. And so we surrender our will and say, not as Jesus did in Gethsemane, not my will, but thine be done. I want to be most useful to you. I want to be the greatest servant. And he says that the way to do that is to move to the end of the line and not be first. We're all afflicted with the me first syndrome. And he says you need to practice being a servant of all and humbling yourself and seeking. We were riding on the airplane between London and Edinburgh, and this man, it's one of those typical things. Everyone was on the plane. We were all seated. We all got our stuff up above. We all got our stuff under our feet. We all got buckled in, and we all got settled. And one huffing, puffing person comes on. And wouldn't you know, they were by the window, and we were already seated and all packed in there. And so the man comes running up, and he goes, that's my seat. And I says, great. Do you know how to levitate like they do in India? I said, can you do that? He said, no. I said, well, I'll happily get up. And so we got up and let him in. Well, I'm glad I was nice to him. Turns out he's the Solicitor General. I think that's what they call him. He's this big Scottish attorney. And he was on loan from Scotland to Italy. They asked him to come and examine the Italian government for corruption. Can you imagine the Italians hired the Scottish people to look for corruption? Unbelievable. You know what was really neat was he was watching me. I was getting ready for speaking. I had to go as soon as we landed and speak. And he looked over and he says, oh, hey. He says, the Bible, he says, I go to church too. And I told him where I was speaking, and it turned out he knows the Lord, was a believer. He's high up in the government and a wonderful outreach evangelist to the legal community, both in Scotland and in Italy when he took his trip over there. But what was amazing was that he said, because of the circles I run in, he says, I have to practice humbling myself. And he said, what I do is, he said, I always I will always try and back up and let people go ahead of me in the line. So I don't think that, you get this first class syndrome. Have you ever flown first class, gotten upgraded, or someone was kind to you? You feel different. You look at those peons getting on the airplane. I mean, you're sitting and drinking your orange juice and, you just relish it. And if they stand too long in your section, you want them to move and you don't want them to use your bathroom up there. It's special. And you love being boarded before everybody. You're not like the cattle. You're first class. There's nothing wrong with first class. Seats are wider, so if you're a little overweight, it's a nice place to sit. It's just great. But you know what he said? He said, I'm always first class in everything. He wasn't on our flight. He was late. But he's always first class, and he says, I have to practice not, as a believer, getting proud and thinking people should serve me and thinking that people should get out of the way for me and thinking that people should listen to me and thinking that people should honor me. Jesus said, if you desire to be first, let him be your servant. If you want to be great, be a slave. For just a minute, I want you to think about that. An author by the name of Cecil Northcutt wrote a book called Famous Life Decisions. And he talks about a Japanese saint by the name of Tohiyoko Kagawa and how he decided to live this out. And I'll just read to you about 3 paragraphs. This Kagawa said, "Oh, God, make me like Christ." And so to be like Christ, he went to live in the slums of Tokyo, even though he himself was suffering with tuberculosis. It seemed the last place on earth that a man in his condition should have gone, but he went to live in a 6x6 hut in a Tokyo slum. On the first night, he was asked to share his bed with a man suffering from contagious itch. It was a test of his faith. Would he go back to the point of no return? No. He welcomed this fellow, poor, poverty-ridden bedfellow. Then the beggar asked him for his shirt, and he gave it. The next day he was back for Kagawa's coat and trousers, and got them too. Kagawa was left standing in a ragged old kimono. The slum dwellers of Tokyo laughed at him, but they came to respect him. He stood in the driving rain, preaching the gospel, coughing all the time. God is love, and where love is, there is God. And often he fell down exhausted, and the rough men of the slums carried him gently back to his hut. Kagawa himself wrote, God dwells among the lowliest of men. He sits in the dust heap among the prison convicts. He stands with the juvenile delinquents. He is there with the beggars. He is among the sick. God visits the prison cell before going to the temple. Before he goes to church, let him visit the hospital. Before he reads his Bible, let him help the beggar there in his greatness. And Kagawa ministered Christ by going to the lowliest and being lowly like them. Now, I don't think that we have to go to the slums if there are any around here, but what I think is we make a mental choice, as Jesus said. I honor, Matthew 20-28, I honor those who willingly put themselves to the end of the line, put themselves to the end of the head table. They don't sit at the head table. They don't think that they have to be treated first class. Jesus said, I will honor you with a well done if you will humble yourself as a slave. If you turn to Luke 21, I want to show you another one. Luke 21, Jesus says this. In Luke 21, starting in verse 1, Jesus will reward us when he sees us loving to sacrifice for him through our financial generosity. Remember, Jesus talked more about money than any other topic. It's a big item. He talks about money being the monitor of our heart. In Luke 21, he tells a story, Jesus does. He looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts in the treasury, and it's good that they did. And then he saw a certain poor widow, verse 2, putting in her 2 mites. And he said, truly I say unto you, this poor widow has put in more than all. I hear a lot of people lament. They say, oh, I wish I could be wealthy. I'd give so much to the Lord. Did you know what? The Lord doesn't need you to be wealthy to give so much to him. He needs you to give sacrificially from what you have. And the tragedy is I see a lot of people who are suffering, who are struggling with their finances. And what they do is they defer giving to the Lord. And they say, when I get out of debt, when I get all this, or when I get a better job, I'll give. Do you know what? This woman was impoverished. And what Christ could not forget is she gave, look what it says in verse 4. All of these out of their abundance have put an offering for God, but she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. The reward in heaven is proportionate to the cost to us. I have a friend who started a company in Louisiana and did very well with it. They call him, when I see him, the $250 million man. But you know what? When he gives $10,000, it's nothing to him. I mean, he makes that every day. But when someone writes a $5 check and they're on a $250 a month Social Security pension fund, and when they can barely make ends meet, the Lord sees that they have given out of their poverty. So don't refrain. Did you know there's nothing wrong with putting quarters in the offering? In fact, it doesn't matter what you put in. In fact, it's hard. You know, I have to go to 2 services here. All of you think it's hard. You go to 1, I go to 2. Both morning services. And both times they pass the plate. And so I've had to start writing 2 checks instead of 1 because I don't want to miss the blessing of giving. And children should be encouraged. You know, the old thing of getting a jar and there are 10 dimes, you break the dollar in 10 dimes and give 1 out of the 10 to the Lord. Not to be legalistic and to be tithers, but to get them in the habit of giving. You know, I don't like all this automatic direct deposit stuff, you know, and all this. Even to the missionaries, I still love to actually write the check and pray for them as I mail it, and to think that I'm actually investing in heaven and actually putting it into not the wonderful servant of the Lord, blue-shirted ushers that we have here, but actually I'm putting it into the Lord's hands. And what Jesus said is, I reward those who sacrifice. In fact, in Matthew 6:19, Jesus said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Be as anxious to accumulate treasures in heaven as we are to manage our finances on earth. Both are important. If you don't provide for your family, the Lord says a man is worse than an infidel. So you and I must provide and pay our bills and be responsible stewards. But we are supposed to have a great concern. Jesus said we should seek to lay up for ourselves. There's nothing wrong with wanting to have treasures in heaven. In fact, Jesus commends it. There's this whole movement in the church. They say, oh, you know, I'm going to be low-key. I don't want rewards. I just want the Lord to get all the credit. That often is an excuse. It's an excuse to an indolent lifestyle for the Lord. Instead of striving like Paul. Paul says, I buffet my body. I beat myself down. I'm constantly agonizing and going through life because I want to win the prize. That should be the heartbeat of all of us. And in these times, I want to remind you, we live in very uncertain times. In fact, with everything that's been going on, the 40.8% drop in the equity markets in 2008 so far, I started reading about the last Great Depression. And if you want to get really sick, you ought to read Willard Cantillon's book, The Day the Dollar Dies. It's a recounting of the European recession after World War II. And it's unbelievable what he says. He said in there, a German mother wanted to assist in the building of a Bible school on the outskirts of the destroyed city of Frankfurt. She held her money with pride and tenderness as though it was a part of her life. She earned the money with hard work. She was investing it in a worthy cause and beamed with pride. But Cantillon continues, how could I tell her that she had held this money too long? Remember what happened with the mark after the war? It became worthless. They had to redo their whole currency because of the hyperinflation that went on. Cantillon continues, how could I tell her she held the money too long? Why did it fall my lot to shock this sensitive soul with the news her money was virtually worthless? Why had she not read the morning paper or heard the announcement of the new government in Bonn, canceled the currency? On that Sunday in June of 1948, a staggering number of Germans committed suicide. Millions lost their savings because the mark had been canceled by the government. If only they had exchanged their money for something that would survive the economic collapse. If this dear lady, bless her, had brought her money sooner, those marks would have helped pay for the renovation of the facilities of the school. Too bad that she had to hear the disappointing words, Madame, I'm sorry. I cannot accept your money. Now that was one slice out of post-World War II Germany. But someday every dollar every piece of gold and every jewel will be devalued and wiped out forever. 2 Peter 3:10 says the day of the Lord will come and everything's going to burn up. So much for Wall Street. Goodbye to stocks and bonds and property and gold. Goodbye to houses, condos, and cars. The wise investors should put their money in a place that will bring the greatest dividends for the longest time. We cannot take dollars and Krugerrands and maple leafs with us unless we transmute them into something that will bridge the gap between earth and heaven. On a wall in a New York City rescue mission, there are these lines. Angels from their realms on high look down with us with wondering eye, that we are but such passing guests. We build such strong and solid nests. But when we hope to dwell for aye, we scarcely take heed one stone to buy. Think about where your treasures are in economic uncertain times. Jesus said, lay them up in heaven. Give them to me before they're worthless. Jesus will finally say, well done. And I want you to turn there. Turn to Matthew 5 before we go tonight. In Matthew 5, Jesus said he will say, well done, when he sees us loving to sacrifice, when he sees us investing our treasures, when he sees us dreaming of his well done, when he sees us being Christ-like servants. But another thing that isn't as popular, Jesus said in Matthew 5, 11 and 12, that he will reward us when we love trials and joyfully accept injustice. Jesus said this in verse 11, blessed are you when they revile and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice, be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. And he added, they persecuted the prophets that were before you. Do you know what Jesus said he honors? Well, we are willing, as I said this morning, not to hide our bushel basket, our light under it, but we expose the light of Christ to the world. And you know what will happen? This week I shared the gospel with a lady in Scotland. And I said, could I tell you the greatest news in all the world from God's Word? She said, no. She said, I'm not interested in anything to do with God. And I mean, she just, that was, you know, she didn't beat me, didn't kick me, didn't spit on me. She absolutely derided Christ. You know what the Lord said? We should be letting his light shine. And when we, verse 11, when we're reviled for it at work, when they mock us, when they persecute us, when we're left out, and when they go beyond that and threaten us, when they say all kinds of evil against us falsely for Christ's sake, we should be rejoicing and exceeding glad, for great. Jesus didn't say that very often. Great is your reward in heaven. There is a reward for standing up for Christ, for speaking for Christ, for letting our light shine for Christ. He rewards that. Great is your reward in heaven. Well, the greatest words that any of us could hear are to someday have Jesus Christ look at us at the end of our lives and say, all the sins are erased. The record is clear. You with your life sacrificed for me your resources. You sacrificed your time. You spoke for me. You took joyfully the reviling you took for standing for me. You moved to the end of the line. You didn't have to be first class in life. You humbled yourself for me. You are well done as a good and faithful servant. You mowed straight. You were erratic at times, but you listen and you let the grace of God teach you to deny and to discipline yourself and to seek first the kingdom of God. Tonight, what are you going to have to cast at his feet? I hope that we will decide in these simple ways and others that we'll see to seek his reward. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, I thank you tonight for that great sight, the angels, the throne, but most of all you, Lord Jesus. When we get to see you face to face and we get to say, Lord Jesus, I have lived my life as much as I could for you. Here it is. And to have you, Lord Jesus, pass our lives through the fire and see what survives and that we get to give that to you as our love gift forever. I pray we would be motivated to speak for you, to suffer for you, to go to the end of line for you, to treat those who are less fortunate in life with your compassion and love. May we be moved for those who are in need like you were and like you are. And may we all seek to have your well done as your good and faithful servants. And that's our prayer in the precious name of Jesus, and for his glory we pray. And all God's people said, Amen.